All right. Wow. This is amazing. I'm having a great day today. This is fantastic. I hope you are all enjoying the sessions as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our next session. And this is why management isn't for everyone. And so I don't want to be negative by any means for this session, but this group, we've spent a lot of time talking about the societal pressures that many people feel are to go into leadership. And it might not be what we want. It might not be the right time. And we might not be in the right life situation to be successful in that type of role. And when that happens, unfortunately, it might put us in a situation to fail. And so today I'm joined by Bill at Lenovo, Bren. Bren, we got to update your title over at Instabase. And Steve Green, or also known as Kelly Podersky, for today's session. So how's everybody doing today?
Doing well.
Great.
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to getting into today's session. And actually, again, as we do this, would love people to continue the conversation in the Slack. It's been super active and engaging. And if you have questions for us, please use them through the Q&A. Now, we're going to go through a number of topics in this session and talk about some of the ins and outs. And I think my ask of individuals is when you're in the Slack, if you're willing to be vulnerable, we would appreciate it. But before we get started, I'm going to ask a poll. I want to know if you're currently a people leader or not. And do you or did you feel pressure to take the next step into leadership? All right. We're going to let that poll run here for a moment. But Kelly, I would like to start with you. I think a lot of times we focus so much on titles versus actual experience. And, an SE that is 3 years into their career has much different experience than an SE at 10 years in their career. So why do you think we focus so much on actual titles?
So I think this question is perfect timing as a culmination of some of the conversations we just had in our past sessions, to be honest with you. I think a big part is growing up. We look at people with these different titles and think, oh, you're a director, you're a vice president, you're a this, you're a that. Wow, that's just such a big deal. The reality, though, is it can be very different from organization to organization. A manager at one organization could be really kind of at the same level as a VP at another organization. I think that is an important fact to just put out there first and foremost. The responsibilities are different. The products are different. But I think that there's just that innate concept of having that title, if you will. So I think that's a big piece. It also has to do, I think, with the role in the team itself. As we've talked about in some of our earlier sessions already, sure, someone might only have 3 years of pre-sales experience, but perhaps they had another career beforehand that lends itself really well to that leader role. And I see that a lot. No one has a quote unquote traditional path into getting into an SE role. I mentioned in the very, very beginning of our session, I love hearing people's stories about how they got into solution engineering, solution consulting, because everybody's got a crazy story. I went from here, that I met this person and they talked to me about this crazy role that I had never heard of. There's always a different path into it. So maybe you've had 10 years of SE experience and that's been your only career. Maybe you've had 3 years of SE experience plus a whole other career behind it that lends itself to that leadership role. So I think it's hard to just look blanketly at their tenure in that role and a little bit more holistically. And then also just what does that role really mean at that organization or for that team? So hopefully that'll kind of kick off the conversation at least here. I'm sure there's more to add to that.
Yeah, Kelly, I'm really happy that you said that. A couple things there. One of them is the titles about meaning different things at different companies. So for example, I know someone who's been involved with PreSales Collective. She's been a senior director and she has 800 reports. I've worked with people who are senior directors who have 5 reports.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting. Even with the PreSales Leadership Collective, when we started it last fall, we tried to keep it directors and above, but it was that same situation, right? And so it doesn't always tell. I just think our culture generally, right? Rob Falcone brought this up on a career webinar that he was a COO. Right. He was a COO and so was Sheryl Sandberg, but Sheryl Sandberg was of Facebook and he was of a 2-person company. Right. And so we get obsessed with titles, but really that experience is an extremely underrated component about being successful in the role. And Bren, we've talked about this before, and I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on this. You believe that management shouldn't be viewed as an upgrade. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so what I meant by that is that this is this natural tendency to sort of see a management role as a natural evolution once you've reached a certain stage of your practice in pre-sales and actually pretty much any other type of job. But it's only an upgrade in a thematic sense, right? Because it's related to the job you came from. But it shouldn't be viewed as an upgrade, I think, because they're completely different jobs. They require completely different skill sets. What makes you a good individual contributor isn't what makes you a good leader for technical team, pre-sales services, and so on. When I started in leadership, I like to think I was a pretty decent SE. But when I started managing people, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know what was in it for me. I just thought of it as, I'm a senior sales engineer, like you said, with titles. I got to make it to manager, right? It seemed appealing on paper. And then I started and was provided no guidance whatsoever, which is, I think, another problem in the enterprise. Like, you promote people because they're good individual contributors, but you don't always equip them to be equally successful managers and people leaders. And so it's not an upgrade in that it requires a completely different skill set, right? Management and leadership, it's about finding and igniting this internal commitment from others to rally around a common vision for the team and for the company. That has nothing to do with being an IC. When you're an individual contributor, you operate on particular metrics that are much more operational. Those leadership qualities, again, completely different skill sets. So I would really, I don't think it's an upgrade at all. It's literally a different job.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate you bringing that up, right? Because, what makes you a great IC will not always translate to being a good manager or a great manager. Right. And actually, you could be an average solutions engineer, but a fantastic leader. Like Cindy Goodwin-Sack actually says that she was a terrible individual contributor, but she's been a great leader, right, for 15 years. Brent, I'm going to ask you a follow-up here, is that if you're thrusted into that role too early, right, how can that be detrimental for the following years down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. And detrimental to you, but also detrimental to the company you work for, I think. Because it's like, I mean, I'm sure there's 300, 400 people that are attending. I'd be surprised if less than 95% of the people attending here didn't have at some point of their career a terrible boss, right? And a very natural question to ask yourself then is not, oh my God, I hate my boss for this and that reason, but more, how did they get to where they are in their career? What motivated them to get into that role? And how did they get promoted, right? I think that's like very important to wonder, because if you go into a leadership position and you're either not prepared or you don't have the empathetic qualities of leadership, you can mess it up for yourself, but also for the entire organization that's downstream. And that can be, it's much more difficult, I think, to bring back to health an organization that has poor leadership than one that has poor individual contributors but good leadership. It's much more damaging in the long run.
Yeah, very good point, Brent. Bill, do you have anything to add on this topic?
Yes, actually, I do. I absolutely agree, Brent, and we kind of chatted about this the other day as well. Yeah. I have had some pretty bad managers in my life. I've also had some very good managers in my life, and you never know what they're going to bring day one. I think, when new management comes in and you're an individual contributor, it's kind of best to just wait and see how things shake out. Don't get invested in there too early. Sometimes who you think may not turn out to be great becomes the best that you've ever worked for, et cetera. But, and sometimes it's quite the opposite. But, really, when it comes to, to management as a whole, I think you need to understand what the company dynamic is. If you're coming from an individual contributor role going into a management role, really, do you have the ability to drive some of that change that you want to change, or is the company not open for it? And how is that going to impact your ability to be happy in your role and also effective in your role as well? Yeah. So there's a lot of things to consider before making a move from an individual contributor to management. And Bren, like you said, it's not really a promotion. It's a completely different skill set. It's different work. And, management, leadership are also very, very different as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good point, Bill. So Kelly, that leads me to a question around, management roles. Like, not all management roles are created equal, right? For my personal example is that when I was a SE leader at a startup, it was much different than being a frontline leader at a big organization like Salesforce. I mean, it was drastic. It's similar, but drastically different at the end of the day. And so, we talked about a couple of things like being set up for success, right? Like, you have to be in the right position to hopefully excel in that role to management. But what are things that, you would look for to ensure a leadership role is right for you?
Yeah, I think Brendan and Bill just covered a lot of that, to be honest. Bill just made a very good point. A leader and a manager are two very different things. And there's this saying that I think is usually negatively looked upon of, the best individual contributor doesn't always make the best leader. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's negative, because it part of what you need to be looking for in that role is, do you feel like you're going to be able to do a good job? Brendan mentioned if you don't have that empathy, for example, it's not only going to hurt you, but it's going to hurt the entire team. I think there's a lot of self-awareness that you need to have when you're looking at that role. And if you are brand new to it, I think an important part about it as well is making sure that there are folks above you that can be your champions, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, that are going to be there to help you. Maybe you don't have all of the best skills, but if you have folks that are willing to invest in you so that you can grow, and therefore, again, back to Brendan's point, it's not only going to be damaging to you, but to the rest of the team. If you can grow and therefore the team can grow, I think that's a really important aspect to look at. What's the culture, right? For example, I couldn't move into a manager role where everybody needed to be and wanted to be micromanaged. That is not my style whatsoever. There could be scenarios where that is a desire and that is a style, but if that was the role that I was looking at, I know for me personally, I would run away screaming from that. So thinking about it from that aspect, I think is going to be important. So do you feel that even if they're not fully developed, that your inherent qualities could match that? And even myself, I'm thinking about myself, my director and my VP are my mentors already. They're my champions. They knew that they were, quote unquote, taking a risk, if you will, as a first-time manager. But I knew that they believed in me and they supported me, and they're going to help me along the ways as I go through and learn this process. I feel like if you're walking into a scenario much like what Carlos just talked about as well, honestly, where you're not going to have that support, it's not impossible, but it's certainly going to be more of an uphill challenge. So I think those are some of the different things that you should really take into consideration. There's a long list beyond that as well, but I think those are some good ones to get started with.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I'm going to ask Bren and Bill, do you have anything on this topic? Otherwise, I want to switch gears a little bit.
Nope. Yeah, makes sense.
Bren, roles like CXO or CTO, CIO can exist within companies without actual management experience. And so why do you feel that there's this pressure out there that you have to take on a management role to get to a C-level position?
Yeah, I think it's almost a historical thing. I think people think of companies as the pyramid type structures, and if you want to rise, it means going one level up on that pyramid, but then it means having more downstream people. Mm-hmm. And so with fewer people, then you often have to take some level of management responsibilities. But while it's very common to operate like that, I don't think it's always the case. I think in all the organizations I've ever worked for, there were very, very senior roles that didn't actually have any sort of people management responsibilities, right? Think about field CTOs, industry experts. Like right now at Instabase, we're looking for a senior sort of global architect that can go and leverage their experience of a particular industry and go talk to our customers and work as an overlay between sales and pre-sales. You often see principals as a title, which are elevated sort of individual contributors that are taken into account by other teams as advisors in most cases. So there are definitely options. I think they're not completely mainstream. I think part of that is because for the most part, the pre-sales profession hasn't been really organized as a unit, right? And that's what you're doing with Pre-Sales Collective. So I think it'll help define sort of those alternate career paths that often go out of sight, even though they are there. Yeah.
Oh, that's great perspective, Brendan. And Bill, I want to ask you your perspective, right? Because you've spent more time in hardware, intelligent devices. And so does that field still have a lot, or that, persona industry have a lot of upward growth from the individual contributor to the C-level?
I think anything's possible no matter what industry you're in, be it hardware, software, or widgets. It doesn't matter. I think a lot of that comes down to the corporation. The company itself, the culture is very important. But really what's most important is you and what makes you happy. And are you doing the right job for you? Being pressured into management to me is never a good thing. And we've touched on that. What's the difference between kind of management and leadership? There are some differences there. I myself also came from an IC role into management. I have been in management in many different areas in the past. Going from an IC to a manager, as we've kind of defined already, you're not really graduating or getting to the pinnacle of your career by going into a leadership role from an IC. Again, it comes down to what makes you happy. Most of us in this industry, as a pre-sales engineer, are doing this because we're either tech geeks, gadget geeks, et cetera. And it's what we do. It's what makes us happy. Looking at our day jobs and the assignments we have, the projects we have, et cetera, kind of tie back to what we do in our personal life. And we generally have a situation that is unlike a lot of other careers. We have the ability to take a good piece of our personal life, because it really mirrors what we do in our work life. And instead of going for the work-life balance, which we're always talked about, we're always striving for this work-life balance. I'm not a big fan of it. And with work-life balance, you have to take and give to keep things really going like this, really keeping things truly balanced. With where we come from, with what we do, with where our interests are personally and also professionally, I'm more akin to a work-life harmony, where we let it ebb and flow, our personal experiences and our also work side, let it ebb and flow, and it kind of really elevates both sides of us. So that's kind of how I look at this whole thing, from the big picture.
Yeah, Bill, thanks. You brought this up a couple times. I'd love for you to expand it. For you, like management versus leadership, can you expand your thoughts and definition on the similarities yet the differences?
Sure. Both types are actually needed. As I'm not saying one is better.
Bill freeze.
No, he was just getting to the good part.
For those who don't know, Bill is like in the mountains of Colorado, and he's lucky to have Wi-Fi signal today. So hopefully he'll be back and joining us. We anticipated this could have happened today. So
what happened?
Bill, we lost you. You're right. It came true.
Am I back?
You're back. You're back.
Sorry. All right. Try this one more time with video. If not, we will go to just audio. At what point did I back out on there?
Literally right at the start. Right at the start.
Right on time. All right. So really, managers and leaders are both needed within organizations. They're just, I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're just different. What I see with managers is managers tend to manage what comes across their desk. They're very reactive to what's going on within the business, and often can bring a lot of great stability to a team, especially if there have been, there's been a lot of change or a lot of uncertainty recently. They can really stabilize that out. They generally know how things are done, and they really are good at basically instructing others to, on the how to get things done. With a leader, I see them more on the inspirational role. They really inspire action. They motivate. They take a lot more risks to drive change. They try to get much more innovative, and not just by themselves, with their teams. Really sitting down, creating smaller teams, and really empowering the individuals on their teams to get the most out of them. They tend to be a bit more charismatic, really plan for the future, and where managers really know how it's done and drive others to do so, leaders really go up to the front and show how it's done. And that's kind of how I see the difference between the two.
No, I appreciate that, Bill. It's good perspective, and some of the things that were echoed in the last session as well. Bren, I want to do this live because I'm reading the Slack, the beauty of running a number of events throughout the year. And I'm seeing a couple comments here that potentially we're missing the point that most companies, there isn't a personal or financial growth outside of management. I don't know. Do you have an opinion on that?
No, I mean, it's true, right? Like I said, the mainstream way of doing things is in a pyramid shape. So it is to tell your staff, you're going to go through 4 or 5 levels of seniority for a sales engineer, solution engineer, and then you're going to go into management. And very few companies will tell you, well, you can pursue a more industry specific track or a more technical track or a more people management track. The last option I mentioned is very often the only one that's proposed to employees. The rest isn't really in the system in a generalized way. So it's up to us to work towards changing that perception, right? Because pre-sales is this conjunction between being very technically literate, but also storytelling abilities. There's value for that in the enterprise, but because it's almost an ad hoc profession, not a lot of it is organized in that way. Yeah, so it is a valid point now.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, like, as you mentioned in your answer about the CSO or CTO, CRO, these are things that we are trying to actually do with PreSales Collective, is put this out there, because someone actually just ran a poll and asked how many levels of IC exist. And the number one answer on this poll right now, it's only got about 25 or 30 responses, is 3. Is 3 levels of IC leadership, IC individual levels. And so, if you've done this for 5, 6, 8 years, I agree that you could feel like, hey, I have to go to management to kind of diversify my experience. I have learned that you can have roles and responsibility, and as Bill said, feel very fulfilled by doing things that are a little bit outside of your job description. And if you work at a company that's willing to invest in your people and not look at everybody in a box and like, this is your role, this is your box, stay here, then you'll be able to have those type of growth experiences, right? And you'll be able to do a little bit more. And I think, some of the things that we are trying to change with PreSales Collective is that this is a destination role. Like, I've heard for years, people like, oh, well, PreSales Collective is like, it's a transition role, right? You go work in pre-sales for 5 or 10 years, then you go somewhere else. Like, why? It's an amazing job, an amazing profession. And you can make a lot of money, have a great living, have good harmony by being an individual contributor IC for your entire life. And so I think that's like a trend that I'm really interested in keeping my pulse on. But I'm curious, before I kind of ask 2 more questions, Bill, Bren, or Kelly, do you have any thoughts on that?
I just want to add in really quickly. I saw that comment. It's a good comment, but I do think there's a common misconception that just because you have like manager or some sort of leader title, you're not necessarily making more money than some of the ICs on your team.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth?
Going to leave that there.
Especially if your SE teams in quotas. I've talked to a couple organizations who have their SE teams and quotas. They're definitely making more money than their managers and their leaders. So good point on that, Kelly. But again, I think that goes to Bill's point about actual happiness and harmony and understanding what we're doing. Bill, you have any perspective on that? Otherwise, I want to move to one of our final questions.
Just quickly, I couldn't agree more with what you say. And I think we're fortunate enough in this industry, pre-sales, technology is ever evolving, ever changing. While there may just be an average of 3 different levels within the IC role, and actually within pre-sales here, it's also 3 currently. The technology changes on a yearly basis where the job never truly gets stale. There's so much to learn, so much to stay ahead of, so many new problems to solve for your customers year in and year out, that I used to joke that our team was a place where your title came to die. But your job never did. You were always happy. You were always on the forefront of bleeding edge technology, but your title never evolved.
I love that, Bill.
That's I love
fantastic.
that. So
and by the way, somebody said you have a great radio announcer voice. So I'm not sure if you do any of that in your spare time.
Pre-Sales Collective.
Well, I've got to know some people in the Lenovo organization, right? Even Stephen Miller, right? He's been doing it for 25 years. And one of the things that if anyone has ever worked for me, you either love this or hate this about me, is I love special projects. Like I will always give my team special projects because I have, without a doubt, a belief that we always need to move the needle forward. Like there's always something that could be improved and can be done better. And so if you are doing your day-to-day and you're not feeling fulfilled, I guarantee you that there is a transformational project that you could run in your organization that will move your organization forward. Like I fundamentally believe it. I mean, there's a couple people that used to work for me on this call that were probably like, James, like I hated that you gave me these things, but they help us grow. They help us learn. They help move things forward. And that's what it's all about, right? We are coming up to the end of this session and I want to be very good on time. We had almost 40% of people say that they did feel pressure to move to management. Wow. So that number was higher than I expected. So I'm happy to hear that. And so let's do a quick round of advice. So what advice do you have for people listening today that are feeling that sort of pressure that they need to take on a management role as their next step? And Bren, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I think doing a little bit of homework around asking the people in your organization that you consider to be good managers and even not so good managers, what it is that they find the most rewarding, the best part and the worst part of their job, I think is an important question to ask. Because you can derive sort of like common traits that you'll notice in good leaders and good managers, and then ask yourself if it's something that you're excited about, right? It's not like if you haven't been in management before, being a little bit fearful or scared of what it entails is completely fine, but don't go into it if when you wake up in the morning, you dread talking to people all day, right? If you don't have this fiber for getting to know people, getting to understand what motivates them, what drives them, maybe it isn't for you. But if that excites you, yet you're a little bit fearful of it, you should still take a look, right? You should read a couple of books. There's some fantastic resources out there. When I started, I did know what I was doing, and I didn't actually know that I wanted to do this job because I love talking to people and listening to their stories. But it turns out that I do. So I guess I got lucky in that sense. I just wish I had that piece of advice before I started so I could have made a conscious choice towards it.
That's great. Bill? Thanks, Bren.
I don't want to repeat most of what was said because I absolutely agree with you, Bren. Maybe just on top of that, really investigate, not only externally, but internally within the company, the things that you want to do. Are the doors open? Kind of like we said before. The role is a fundamental shift from what you're doing, as an IC, and it's a lot more work and pressure. And if you don't have the desire to truly help and to truly be there working for that team, because you are truly working for them, they may be your employees, but you're working for them. If that's not for you, you may want to think twice about it. I mean, you're really in a place to grow and change things for the better. And if you're not doing that, you may lead yourself down a pretty pretty depressing path. And like you said, if you're waking up dreading the workday, I actually look at it even a day before, and it's kind of a telltale sign: are you in the right job or not? The right job or not? On Sundays, all of you should think about this from time to time. On Sundays at 3 p.m., are you still enjoying your weekend, or have you lost your weekend because you're starting to dread the coming work week? And week in and week out, if it's going down the dreading path, maybe it's time for a change.
That is fantastic feedback, Bill.
Thank you.
Kelly, take us home. We just have a minute left.
Last thing, I'll just put something out there very quickly. I think as SDs, we really are very good at following the rules, but here's some food for thought, especially in those smaller organizations. Like I'm seeing some folks saying there's really only one or two roles. Maybe explore creating a different role. Maybe team lead versus full-blown manager might be the right thing, or going down a slightly different path. You might not know that role that you're supposed to move into next doesn't even exist yet. It's definitely easier said than done, but I know we're short on time, so I'm just going to kind of leave with that food for thought.
Love it. Well, thank you three so much for your time and for this session. Bren, Bill, thank you for the energy putting into this. And Kelly, thanks for joining us on Last Second Break.
I'm sure people are loving hearing my voice over and over again.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.